In this video tutorial, I'm going to show you how you can easily solve a common problem of the background being too sharp in your portraits with the new Portrait Bokeh AI inside Luminar AI. Hi, I'm Darlene with Digital Photo Mentor, and I use my over 33 years of experience as a photographer to teach beginner and intermediate photographers like you how to improve your photos from capture all the way through to the end of the editing process and the final image. Luminar AI is a huge part of my digital workflow because it's so easy to use, especially for beginners. So I'm going to show you how to use the new Portrait Bokeh AI tool inside Luminar AI, and stick around till the end because I'll have a bonus tip for you. Remember to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any great new videos. Let's get started. One of the tools that portrait photographers use to have their subject stand out in the image is to create an image where the background is blurred. When the subject is sharp and the background is blurred, the subject will stand out. But if you don't have a lens with a large aperture, such as maybe an 85mm 1.8 or a large zoom lens with a 2.8 aperture as the largest aperture, you may struggle to create images like that. So Skylum is aware of that problem and has incorporated a tool into Luminar AI to help you with that. It's called Portrait Bokeh AI. And I've selected a few images to demonstrate for you in this tutorial. This one in particular, because you'll notice here, if you look at the information at the bottom, I actually photographed this woman on the street in India at f5.6 with a fairly wide lens, 23mm. So the background is fairly sharp. Let's take a look at that. This image over on the left here was actually photographed with f5 as well, but you'll notice that the background is really blurry. I've already applied the Portrait Bokeh AI. So I'll show you the before on that one. Let's take a look. Here is the before image. You can see that the background is indeed fairly sharp. I've also used some of the other tools in Luminar AI, like the sky replacement, to swap out the sky and warm up the image. See what a big difference that makes when the background is blurrier. If you want to try this on your images, just follow along and open up an image that has a background that you'd like to blur. Make sure you've updated Luminar AI. The recent update 4 includes this tool. So make sure that you go to Luminar AI, check for updates to make sure that you are indeed using this current version. As you can see, I am. If it pops up and says you've got version 1.4.0, you're good to go. Once you've got it opened inside of Luminar AI, go to the Tools panel on the right and scroll down to the Portrait section. You'll notice a brand new one here now at the very top called Portrait Bokeh AI. To answer any questions that may come up ahead of time, no, it doesn't currently work on anything except portraits. So I did try it on a few images of animals and it didn't recognize them as faces. I know that's something that they may consider adding in the future. If that's something that you would want this tool to do, make sure to send your feature requests to support@skylum.com so that the more people that ask for it, they may build that into the program. It's a company that really listens to what people that are using the program need it to do. So I'm going to reset this tool because I've already applied it, and then I'm just going to show you how to use it. The original image, once again, was much cooler and the sky was pretty plain. So I've already done some general enhancements to the image. Now I want to blur out the background. The first thing you'll see is the amount slider, and that's going to obviously control the amount of blur. I'm going to bring it up most of the way. Let's go to about 70. Now you'll notice that this worked pretty fast on my image. If you're doing this for the first time on your image, it's going to take a little bit longer because Luminar AI is analyzing your image to try and cut the subject out against the background. So it's doing automatic masking for you. When I move my mouse over here, you can see the part in red is the mask. So you can see it's chosen the two ladies here as the subject. And it's done a really good job. I'm going to zoom in to 100% so you can see it. It's done a really good job cutting them out, including recognizing that there's a space in between where their arms are. So if I hover my mouse over again, you can see these gaps here where the elbow is separate from the body, and Luminar AI was smart enough to pick that up. It also does a really good job masking any areas with hair. That's something that's really tricky. If you try doing this in something like Photoshop or another program, you'll know how difficult that is. So if I look at the before and after to see what it's masking out, it is taking a little bit of the hair out on her shoulder and on the top of mom's head. But actually, I think that's a good thing, because how much time do you spend in Photoshop cleaning up stray hairs that are sticking out? Now the Portrait Bokeh AI tool is actually doing that for you. If it doesn't get the mask quite right, you have these tools down here under brush control. So you can automatically defocus or focus parts that you want to change. If you've painted some areas in and you want to go back to how the original mask was, just paint with Restore at 100% opacity. So I'm actually going to add a little bit of defocus. Let's dial it down to about 30 here, right in between their heads. Right? And I'm just going to go over it really gently, sort of in this corner here, and see how that does. Because I want to blur the hair a little bit more in that area. Okay, I'm going to make another pass. And often I do these kinds of things at a lower opacity because I don't want to make the edit or the brush strokes really obvious. Now I can see I've kind of created a bit of a mess here, so I'm just going to clean it up. So see how I'm doing one stroke at a lowered opacity, and then checking it, and then doing another stroke. Because if you do it at full 100% opacity and it's in the wrong place or it's too far, you're going to have to undo it anyways. So I just go slow and build it up little by little. The other thing that you can use to adjust the mask is this slider down at the bottom here. If you don't see these tools, just make sure you open the little arrow here at the bottom that says background. And all of these things are going to allow you to control not only the mask, but the part of the background that is being blurred and how the effect looks. So edge correction, if I take this slider to the right, I'm going to go all the way just to show you what it does. Can you see what it's done? It's basically expanded the mask inward onto the subject. So you can actually see now there's a bigger space around the elbows, and it's coming into her arm. Okay, so the mask is coming in tighter on the subject when you go to the right. When you go to the left, it's going to expand out more towards the background. You can see the difference in here on her arm. Let me move that off of her. Look exactly in the arm area, and you can see that now the background is sort of blurring into the subject. So I find that most often the default of 20 on that slider works really well, but double check, make sure you zoom in to 100% like I did so that you can see the fine details of hair and those little pockets of space in between limbs and so on. Next, I'll go through each of these sliders and what they do to control how the background looks. Brightness should be fairly self-explanatory, and this is another really handy tool because if you've shot something, if you've done a people picture or a portrait and the background is too bright, that will also cause attention to go away from the subject. So you can see by darkening the background here, it really looks like a dark sunset. I could even change the color temperature if I want to make it more like nighttime. Right? I could also remove the sunset that I added behind them and see how that looks. So I can actually turn this into a nighttime portrait. I could even go back and add a nighttime sky using the Sky AI replacement tool. I'm going to leave it where it was and brighten it up just a little bit. The idea is that you want it to still look natural and believable, okay? Because I've added warmth to the sky, I've also added warmth to the subject so they match. So you want to keep everything in harmony. The next slider, Highlight Glow, allows you to increase sort of that bokeh effect of bright things in the background will give you more glow. So you can see there's sort of a dance between changing the brightness of the entire sky and increasing those highlights, because if you increase the highlights so much, it'll actually overtake the darkening of the sky that I did previously. So I'm going to find a happy balance somewhere in between. Let's say about 30. The final slider we haven't looked at yet is depth correction. So when Luminar AI analyzes your image, it's doing so with a 3D depth map. So it knows which things are closest to the camera, and that's how it's able to cut out the subject, and which things are farther away. If you've used the Atmosphere AI tool, it does the same thing with placement of fog. So if you want more blur in your image, you want to go to the left. So I'm going to take it all the way and show you the extreme. I'm also going to dial the amount slider up to 100. And I recommend doing that with your edits a lot of times, because when you see it to the extreme, then you can adjust the things down here. I do that with the vignette as well. I turn my feather to 0. So increase the amount, adjust all of these things, then put the amount back somewhere realistic. Okay, now we've got something that looks kind of ridiculous because, as you can see, they're now floating. So if they had a magic carpet, this might be a great edit for this image. But since they're sitting on the ground, I want to make sure that the ground underneath them is also sharp, because this is not realistic. Okay, so the further you drag this depth correction to the left, the closer to the camera the blur or bokeh gets, if that makes sense. So I'm going to drag it further to the middle here, and I want to get it closer to them, but not that it's in front of them. We're getting close, so you can see what's happening there. Let's go a little bit further. Again, most times that default, if you want to go back to default, it's 0, or just double click the slider. Often the default is going to be perfect. So try that first. Try both extremes or on both sides and see which works best for your image. In this case, I'm actually going to make the blur slightly farther away from them, or keep it back further behind them. So what that means is that the blur will start falling off further behind the subject. Now you can see it if we zoom in on them. What I'm looking at is, where does the blur begin and end, and where does the focus sort of fall off? And you can see that it's right about here. Okay, so what's happening is, as I drag this slider to the left again, it's bringing that blur closer to the ladies. I used a fairly wide lens on this. I think it's about a 23, and you won't get that type of blur with a wide lens like this. It just isn't common with these lenses because of the properties of the lens. So I want to make it look a little bit more realistic and give the background a little bit of blur without going over the top. Let's try 40. That looks pretty good to me, because what I'm looking for is I can still make out the city skyline in the background. I can still make out the bridge rails. It hasn't blurred it into oblivion, but it's giving me enough blur, if we look at the before image, to really focus the attention on the subjects. Okay, let's hop over to another image and do another example. I captured this image in the old city in Delhi, India, and I want to apply a template first. You'll notice that I'm under My Templates, and I've created a set of portrait templates for Luminar AI, which are now available in the Skyline Marketplace. I'll put a link to them below the video as well for you. For this image, I'm going to apply my template called Antique Touch. As you can see, it lowers the saturation of the image overall and gives it sort of a sepia or old world look, which I think is really applicable for this image. Then I'm going to hop over to the tools and get to the Portrait Bokeh AI tool. So once again, I need to drag the amount slider to begin. And it takes a moment to do its thing. So remember, it's analyzing the image to look for the subject and do that automatic masking for you. So it's saving you a lot of time. So it may seem like this is taking a really long time, but you don't have to do it yourself. And here's the mask. It's done a really good job, and I don't see anything that I need to correct here. This time I wanted to show you a few of the keyboard shortcuts that you can use with these masking tools. As in any time there's a mask or a brush, you can use the square bracket keys to enlarge it. So that's the right square bracket key. The left square bracket key to make it smaller. I'm just going to make it bigger so you can see it. Then if I hold down Shift and press the left square bracket key, it will adjust the softness of the brush. So the softness of the brush is set to 100, meaning it's a very soft edge to the brush, versus making it smaller or a harder edge. So sometimes when you want to get closer into things, you want a harder edge brush so it's not fading as much. Then you can adjust your size accordingly. So square bracket keys and Shift square bracket to adjust the size and the fade of the brush. If you want to go from painting focus in, you'll notice that when I'm on focus, it gives me a crosshair or a plus in the middle of the brush. And if I just press the X key, it switches to defocus, and now you see a minus sign in the middle of the brush. If I hit the backslash key, you'll see that the mask then turns off and on, so I can see the image underneath if I want to while I am painting. So those keyboard shortcuts are really handy, so you don't have to constantly use the mouse. Let's play around with the adjustment on this one. So I'm going to actually increase the brightness of this background. And I think I don't want this one as blurry close to the subject. I want to have this guy behind her a little more in focus. So I'm going to move the blur further back, again, like I did on the last image. Brightness level of 79 looks pretty good. I'm going to increase the highlight on this one so it does brighten that background. I want it to sort of flare out a little bit, and I'm going to warm it up as well, which will go well with that sepia tone effect that I've added as part of the template. I popped over to the Composition AI tool and did a quick crop to remove some of the bottom and the left side of this image, and I want to show you the image prior to applying the Portrait Bokeh AI. So this is what it looks like before the tool is applied and after the tool. So overall, with a quick template, composition crop, and Portrait Bokeh AI, I've taken this image to a place that I'm very happy with. I have one last image that I wanted to try this Portrait Bokeh AI tool on. This is a shot of a ballerina I took in Havana, Cuba, in a reflection in a mirror. So I wanted to see if the program could pick out the subject in such a complicated scene. So let's see how it does. I'm going to take it all the way to 100. And then I'm going to bring that depth correction down a little bit because look what it's done. It's correctly isolated her even in the mirror. Right? Now, if I wanted to have some of that bureau or this piece of furniture in sharper focus, I could paint that in so that I have the edge sharper and just leave the mirror itself or the background of the mirror to go blurry. So this might take a little bit of playing around with, but initially right out of the gate, I'm pretty impressed that it was able to pick out that subject inside a mirror like that and determine it. I played around with the mask a little bit more. You can see that I put focus onto this little edging of the mirror so that it shows in sharp focus, and it really helps to outline her. I don't mind that at all. Let's take a look at a before and after. So see how fantastic is it's actually blurring the background in the mirror. I found this actually really impressive. So don't be afraid to try this on some complex images. The last thing I want to show you is that any of the edits that you do in Luminar AI are able to be copied and pasted to other images. So for example, I can select this one of the lady from India, right-click, choose Adjustments, Copy, or you can use the keyboard shortcut Command-C, and then I'm going to use the keyboard shortcut Command or Control-V to paste it onto this lady in Vietnam. Then I'm going to open it in the Edit panel. As you can see, it's also applied the Antique Touch template, and it has indeed blurred the background. Now I have all the same controls, and I think I'm going to darken the background this time. I'm okay with it being warmed up because of the sepia, or I'll just keep it neutral. And in this case, I'm actually going to bring the blur slightly closer to her. You have to be careful with this depth correction because, again, if I go all the way, it actually is going to blur the door or the door frame that she's standing right in front of, and that's not realistic looking. Another quick before and after. So that was simply a copy and paste and adjusted a couple of sliders, and I've got a finished image. You can also, of course, save anything as a template. So I've edited this one, for example. I can then save it. And then when you go back into your template panel, it's going to show up under My Templates. Just click My Templates to open, and you'll see it at the top. And then you can rename it. So I might rename it Antique Touch plus Bokeh. Remember I talked about the bonus tip earlier? Well, I'm going to show you a few other tools inside of Luminar that you can use along with the Portrait Bokeh AI tool to bring more attention to the subject. I've got an image that I photographed in an old schoolhouse, and I've done some basic editing to it, including cropping. That's the before image, and that's what I've got so far. So I want to show you, I'm going to apply the Portrait Bokeh AI to blur the background somewhat. So it looks like it's picked out the subject pretty well, and it even knows that she's sitting on a desk. It's missed that little part here, so I'm just gonna paint in there to focus that in. Perfect. Okay, so the mask is good. Now I'm going to work on darkening the background a little bit. I might cool it down just a little bit and take it closer to her so we have a little bit more blur, and take the amount up even higher. So I really want to bring the attention to her beautiful face and not to the busyness of the background that's going on behind her. Okay, I noticed some funky stuff going on here because it's focusing part of the image here. So I'm going to do a defocus at 50% just to kind of soften this edge that's happening here. So look for things like that that might not be picked up perfectly with the original automated mask. Let's take the amount slider all the way to 100 and bring the depth even closer to her. I want to go to an extreme. So remember I talk about using the tools built into Luminar AI or any photo editing software, whether you're using Lightroom or Photoshop or On1 or something else. Use the tools built in, go to extremes, and then find the middle, because you won't know where the middle is or what looks good until you see both edges of the spectrum. So I'm taking this to extreme just so I can figure out where I want to be in the middle. Now you can see that the blur is coming really close to her, starts right behind her. So I think that's a little too close. I'm going to back it off just a little bit. And I don't want those highlights to glow, so I think I'm going to leave it there and move on to the next tools. I'm going to settle somewhere around 70-ish. Now she looks a little overly lit or a little too bright, but now what I'm going to do is the magic of using that face light tool. And this is kind of something that I just discovered myself. So if you bring the face light tool up and then take the overall exposure of the image down, and I'm going to extremes here just so that you can see what's happening, somewhere just below, say, minus 0.5. I'm at minus 0.7 and I'm happy with that. So what it's doing is it's adding more darkening to everywhere except the face. I'm going to take that another step further and add an edge vignette. And as I mentioned, taking things to extreme. So I do the same thing with the vignette. Take the amount really far, take the feather to 0, and this one I want to bring maybe not so much roundness, but definitely smaller because I want to focus in on her. In this case, it looks like it's in the good position. I don't need to move it over. If it's not, you can choose position and change the arrangement or where the vignette applies, like so. Then once you get it where you want it, just increase the feather. Usually 0 to plus 20, somewhere there in there I find is good. And then bring the amount back up to something that's not overly dark or obvious. All of these tools are adding upon the last one. If we look at the original image and where I'm at now, you can see that all the tools, including the Portrait Bokeh AI, the face light, the vignette, and exposure itself, are bringing more attention to her face. And you'll notice that I haven't done any painting. I'm going to go into the details tool. This is where I am going to have to mask a little bit manually, and I'm going to sharpen it. So I want to make sure that I'm protecting some of the details and keeping the sharpening masking fairly high. So what that will do is it'll make sure that it doesn't sharpen smooth areas like her face. Then I'm going to just paint this mask in because I don't want it to apply everywhere. We've done a lot of work to blur the background. So of course I don't want to add sharpening to the background. I just want to add some sharpening to her, in particular her face and her hair and her hand. Once I've done the painting on one mask, I can just click the three little dots and copy it and then paste it onto another tool. So the other one I'm going to use is Structure AI. And if you want to add even more blur to the background than what the Portrait Bokeh AI tool has added, you can go minus structure, and you see that it's applying to the entire image. But I'm going to go into the mask again and paste the one I just copied. Now you remember that I painted the details onto her, so this is actually going to do the same. So if I show the mask, you can see that the minus structure is also applying to her. So I'm going to just invert it so that it applies to everything else. Then I can edit as at will. So if I want to take more of it off of her, I can refine the edges a little bit more. Now I'm going to copy this mask and do it again. And this time I'm going to go to some other blur tools. You could try Mystical or you could try Glow. There's a couple of really great softening effects in here. The Orton effect, soft, works really well. So I'm going to take it up to a high number so you can really see what it does. I find that Orton effect adds a lot of brightness, so you have to dial it back. And then once again, paste in the mask. Okay, so you can see the mask now. Let's see what it's doing. So now you can see the background is really blurry. I'm starting to get some edge blur over here, which is not so bad. It's kind of a blurry edge vignette. But let's look at the before and after. So it's really pulling attention into her. I might even paint a little bit of this glow just down the bottom here so that her legs are not so sharp either. I'm going to do a final super contrast. This is a tool I love to use to tone down the highlights. So you can see I've already used it on the midtones. So what I'm going to do is bring this up to the middle. And then if you go to the right, your highlights are going to be darkened. You see that that's really applying to her face. So I don't want to apply to her face. I want to try and pick up this thing in the background and this desk. Okay. So by doing that, just scale it back a little. I want to make sure it's not on her. So I'm just going to erase from her. So make sure that she is still bright and sharp. And voila. I think we have a finished image. Before and after. So your bonus tip, again, just as a quick review, is don't stop just using the Portrait Bokeh AI tool. Continue on and use the other tools to enhance that tool so that you get maximum attention on your subject. And remember, even if you don't have a big aperture lens or you're shooting with a kit lens, you can use these tools to make your images look like this. To learn more about the other Portrait AI tools inside of Luminar AI, click the video here now. To sign up for my 5-day editing challenge and get access to my raw files to practice with, as well as a tutorial every day, click here now. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Until next time, take care.